So, welcome to the Advanced Patient Care, a podcast series by Vance Thompson Vision. Today's podcast is featuring all things research, and I'll be your host today, Dr. Kayla Karpuk. I'm an optometrist in the Sioux Falls, South Dakota location, who gets to lead our research team here. This podcast is here to bring you the latest advancements, cutting-edge research, and practical tips that you can apply to your clinical practice right away. So, if you're ready to expand your knowledge, stay ahead of the curve, and elevate your practice, you're in the right place. And I'll introduce our guests here today. We have Dr. Seth Stoffren.
Seth Stoffren. I'm one of the optometrists here in Fargo at Vance Thompson Vision. I've been here for about 3 years now. I can no longer say that I'm the youngest doctor at Vance Thompson Vision, but I'm pretty close.
How does that make you feel? Do you wish you could still say you were the youngest doctor at Vance Thompson Vision?
I'm a little indifferent about it. I get told every single day that I look like I just graduated high school by every single patient I see. So I still feel young.
And we also have Tiffany Facile, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Facile, and I have the pleasure of being the research director for 6 of our 7 clinical sites that conduct research. I have the pleasure of working with providers much like Dr. Karpuk, Dr. Stoffren, and those throughout our VTV family.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited for today's podcast. And so we'd like to take this podcast and kind of from a start to finish perspective, walk you through the research process. And of course, it's fun to be able to understand kind of the clinical aspect of it, but it's also important to not overlook some of the understanding the research studies that are published out there. So I think that's kind of where we'd like to start. And so when we are looking at published research, there's different things that we can kind of hone in on when we are reading through, such as, number of investigators, study design, what types of patients were included, were there pertinent patients that were excluded that is meaningful, and kind of going from there. And so Tiffany or Seth, talk me through a little bit about like multi-site versus single site or multiple investigators versus single investigators. Where are those, in looking at that, where is that helpful? Should we be eager to see multi-site data or single site? Tiffany, you want to take that away?
Yeah, thanks. So running clinical trials is not an easy feat. And so sometimes with clinical trials, it's really answering the study question. Is it a proof of concept? Is it safety of a device? Is it efficacy of a medication? And so there's a lot of thought that goes into a study design, as well as basic core statistics. So when you run a multi-site study, typically those are larger, what we say phase studies, meaning there's hundreds to thousands of participants, longer term study. And really the purpose of that is to hopefully get the drug or device approved for clinical use outside of a clinical trial. So when you kind of go back and reverse, you start an earlier phase study, generally with 1 or 2 investigators, a small number of patients. And the purpose of an earlier phase study is really safety. We have to make sure that patients are always protected, of course, and on a clinical trial, we take those things very seriously. We have to follow different regulations, including an ethics board review and determination. So we like to keep things very small to avoid any variables that might either skew the data, potentially cause confusion for the data, and we just need a very tight and controlled operations for that study. So again, it really depends on the purpose of the device or the drug, or really the study question that we're looking to answer, and then the process, if you will, of FDA approval, or perhaps just reviewing something that is generally more broad-based. So clearly, not a straight and linear pathway to developing the appropriate study, but certainly for those of us that have done research a long time, we understand the nuances and the intricacies that it takes to run a clinical trial. So whether we make our own or write our own clinical trial or follow someone else's, those are things that definitely we look towards when deciding to run the study.
Awesome, thank you. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think we could definitely do a deeper dive, and maybe, quite honestly, we should have started here. There's two, I like to view it as two big types of studies. You either have FDA monitored or you have investigator initiated studies. And when we talk about particularly FDA studies, we're probably all familiar with reading, phase 1 versus phase 4. And like I said, you kind of had touched on it a little bit already, but I think it's worth going into the differences of each and where we participate, or maybe where somebody would be interested in starting to participate. So Seth, why don't you talk us through a little bit of those phases?
Sure. And kind of starting with what Tiffany had brushed on a little bit, just with phase 1 studies is going to be earlier on, and this is going to be talking mostly your FDA monitored trials, and that's typically looking at approval for new medication, approval for new device to treat a specific condition. And those earlier phases are going to be smaller scale, less participants, shorter windows. And again, you're looking mostly at safety, one, to make sure that the drug or the device is safe in itself, and then try to figure out the proper dosages that should be used for your specific population that you're targeting. You want to be able to figure out how to maximize your benefits of this treatment while reducing and limiting risk and side effects at the same time. So that first phase, you're looking for acute side effects. Is there a certain level of dosing that these side effects show up? And then you can kind of go around different routes of administration if that's on the table, whether it's oral administration, injection, inhalation. But for us in eye care, most of the time we're looking at eye drops, injectables, or device implantation. And then as we go across or move forward with different phases, they just get larger and oftentimes longer as well. So phase 2, you're looking at a larger scale. So that's when you get to several hundred participants. And then that window gets larger. So instead of it being, several months, you're potentially going up to multiple years, and you're still looking at safety for the most part, but now it's a larger window. So you're looking at longer ranges of your safety profile, and probably 70% of drugs make it to that phase 2. And then 33% of drugs in development make it to phase 3. And that's when you're really starting to look at the efficacy of the medication or the device that's being used. And then you're typically getting out to that, somewhere anywhere between 1 and 4 year windows for that phase 3. And that's when you're officially looking for FDA approval to try to get your drug back out, or initially out on the market. Then, beyond that, phase 4 is when it's post-approval. So you're looking at very long range for safety profile or extended efficacy, prove that this does not just last for 1 to 2 years, it's going to keep on working down the road. So a lot of companies will want that information so that they can prove and say, hey, this has been out for this long and it still works better than what's been out before.
Tiffany, do you find that a phase 4 study, from the FDA perspective, they're always asking for that, or are there certain instances where they might lean into that a little more than others?
That's a great question. So there's different divisions or entities within the FDA. And quite honestly, Dr. Karpuk, the FDA can require a post-approval study for devices post-approval. Some entities within the FDA, like the drug side, may not. So it really kind of depends on how the FDA will view the drug or device or study product, if you will, and understand if a long-term phase study is necessary. Sometimes they won't require post-approval data or study data, and sometimes they do. What's interesting, and this is probably another podcast in itself, but the entire world is actually looking at standardizing how we conduct clinical trials. And so there are international efforts being made to identify the number of safety data points and the number of efficacy data points that are required for approval. And with that said, I've started to notice a lot more long-term safety and efficacy studies being required, especially for device in ophthalmology. And those phase 4 studies can even last as long up to 3 years. And I do believe that is a initiative that came out of our European partners. So I trust that this topic of conversation will change over the next few years.
And I think it's important too to kind of take a step back and, what is research, or where is research helpful? Well, we know that research helps to advance treatment options. That's probably the obvious. Research certainly can help with patient access to treatment. I think all of us here could probably think of a patient or multiple patients who would benefit from being in research. Also, too, it's also it is what helps with insurance reimbursements and or labeling. And that kind of brings me back to, that phase 4 study versus the phase 3 study. Where do you think, insurance companies are looking to for their data in terms of reimbursement?
Can you expand further on that, Dr. Karpuk? I want to make sure that I direct the answer appropriately.
So we know that research can be helpful in terms of advancing treatment options or patient access to care, but I think one that we maybe overlook is how it impacts insurance reimbursement.
So insurance reimbursement can be challenging, and really a lot of that work is done in tandem with the phase 3, phase 4 studies by the sponsors, meaning it's generally required for a new drug or device, especially device, that gets in the arms of our CMS group. So typically a sponsor will, what we say, apply for a code that is a billable code for insurance reimbursement. Certainly all of the data that is required goes into that application process to ensure that the drug or device is effective. And therefore, it's important to make sure the sponsors have the quality data, the clean study data, understands maybe the range and you highlighted this earlier, Dr. Karpuk, but really, what is the label of the drug or device? And if you have statistical significance to prove the safety and efficacy of that certainly achieves insurance approval. There are multiple pathways for something to get approved as well, and we won't go into that in great detail. But certainly these clinical trials attribute to approval in the hopes that our insurance providers find the safety and that efficacy value to achieve insurance approval.
And I think too, maybe there can be a phase 4 study or something thereof that helps to expand labeling. Is that true? And then would go back to insurance companies and reimbursement might look at that.
Absolutely. Initially it's been fun over the years in healthcare to see different drugs or devices get approval for a specific indication, only to find out that the drug or device can be expanded, meaning that there is some signaling of efficacy outside of the product label, which, like you said, then would require a phase 4 type research study to evaluate that. So that's the fun of research, is that it never stops. It always continues, and our patients get access to those.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm feeling the more we're having this conversation, it feels like the wheels, we could just continue to go down this route and talk about this aspect of research, or decide to go down this. And I've got to remind myself, we only have a set period of time. But it's always fun to talk about, because I think that there's so much in research, especially clinical research, that maybe we as clinicians don't really have a great understanding of, because we don't do it all the time. Anyways, so I think that's always interesting.